So this video is to record the installation of Windows Server 2008 R2 as a virtual machine. To start any virtual machine, we want to go into VMware Workstation. It's this icon down here with the orange circle with this kind of teal colored circle. Go ahead and click on that, it's going to launch it. You may or may not have a library panel on the side. Let's see if I can view that. Let's see, tabs. Customized library. I don't find this very useful. It sort of gets in the way personally. I'm just throwing this out there as well, because a lot of these virtual machines I made on different machines or different hard drives, so if I try to use them, they're not going to be linked right anyway. You also have lots of people just using these computers, so I just liked using the menus to open and start virtual machines. So I just go ahead and close this. In fact, I don't even use this screen very often. This is the Home tab. And again, it's just sort of an extra tab on there that's not necessary. It has really big icons, so you can choose to create a new virtual machine or open a virtual machine, or you can do more advanced things. But a lot of times I'll just close that tab and just work with just the virtual machines I want to work with. To get that back, you can go back to tab and then go to the Home tab if you do really want this. I'll be working mainly through the menus up on top. So if I want to create a new virtual machine, I'm going to go to File, New Virtual Machine. And I have the option of doing a typical or a custom install. I usually choose a custom install just because it gives me the option of seeing exactly what the components are. Rarely do I change them, but it gives me the ability to, know what's going on and to make those specific changes if I really want to. Go ahead and click Next. Hardware compatibility is almost like a software version. Is this document going to be a Word 2000 document or it's Word 2012 document? Different features, but you have to worry about compatibility. So as long as everybody's on Workstation 12, you're going to be fine here. If you have to go backwards compatible, you certainly can. Go ahead and clicking Next. We're going to install the operating system later. We're going to build the entire virtual hardware first, then come back and install the operating system. If you want to try this sometime, you can use an installer disk, point to one of your ISO files and go through the installation process. It's called Easy Install. VMware grabs all the information up front and then does the install for you. It takes all the fun out though, because I want to install it. I want to see what's going on. So next I'm going to choose is the operating system. This is like going into the computer store and saying, I want to buy a computer, and they say, well, what are you going to put on it? So I can give you recommendations. You can, if you make a mistake here, like, ooh, I chose 2012 instead of 2016, or I chose Ubuntu instead of Windows, it's still just a computer. You can customize all the hardware along the way, and you can put anything on top of it that you want. It's just hardware. We try to make it as accurate as possible. I will be installing Windows Server 2008, and specifically I'm choosing R2. If you notice, there's an X64 behind it, which means it's a 64-bit of Windows 2008. R2 only comes in a 64-bit operating system. 2008, not R2, but 2008 and prior, always came in two versions. There's a 32-bit operating system and a 64-bit. If you notice, 2012 and 2016 do not have the X64. That's because as of R2, 2008 R2, everything's only 64-bit, so there's no 32-bit option. You don't need to designate that anymore. But in this case, it is a 64-bit version of 2008. It's going to we have to go to naming the virtual machine. This is just the file name of your virtual machine. This does not name the computer inside it all. It's just how VMware is going to identify this. So I like identifying it, in this case, I'm just going to call it 2008. The most important thing is the location of your virtual machine. If you leave it here, it's going to leave it on the classroom computer. Not a good situation. It's going to fill up the disk space. They're really small disks. They don't have room for that. And secondly, you're going to go home and not be able to work with this. So browsing and getting the right location is super critical. I have an H drive. It's my portable drive. I made a folder for different classes, and in this case, it's going to be Server Admin 1, but whatever class you're going to put things in and help arrange things. When you click on it, you can see that I already have one folder underneath there. Navigating this, by the way, is a little tricky. When you click on things, sometimes they scroll off, and sometimes you're not sure what you're highlighted. So be very, very careful. I want to make sure that I'm selecting the class folder, not the subfolder, because it's going to make a new folder underneath there, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to make a new folder called 2008 just to match. Now I'm going to click OK here. So it's that folder, a 2008 folder in the server admin 1 Tuesdays. And I like making them match. They don't have to match. It's just a lot easier looking for things. So if I'm looking for my 2008 server, it's going to be in my 2008 folder. It just makes things really convenient. Realizing if you make mistakes here, that's okay. You can always rename things later and kind of repair that kind of stuff. Just making sure it's on your portable drive is the most important part. Going and clicking next. The next several screens are going to be a lot of defaults on here, so it's going to be the BIOS firmware. We'll just stick with one processor, and it recommends on this server installation that we have 2 gigs of RAM, and that's going to be adequate. If you have the documentation for Windows 10, most of the stuff is going to be the same, so you can just copy and paste it. There's very few changes up to this point of building the hardware. We do have network options. We're going to use the network address translation, which is our private little network, and we're working with the 192.168.118.0 network, and that's where when we're doing static addressing later on, everything's going to be within that environment. So we want to keep all of our servers in that one network. It's going to end up being 192.168.118.0, and I'll take a look at that in just a second, and I'll show you where that can be set if you do need to change that. I can't do that while I'm doing the configuration installation. Here's an I/O controller. It recommends an LSI logic controller. It also recommends SCSI. If we were really interested in the actual platform underneath, we might choose SATA, but it's just the operating system on top that we care about. So we're going to stick with the SCSI, which is recommended. And building a new computer, we want to get a new hard drive. We're not going to use an old one or whatever. We're just going to create a new virtual disk with this. The next screen is the disk size. You said you want a new disk. It defaults to a 40 gig hard drive. It is expandable, which means that it's only making a couple megs, a couple kilobytes in size, and then grow up to 40 gigs. So it doesn't really matter what you put on there because it's not going to take up that much disk space anyway. One thing I would suggest is storing as a single file. If you separate this into multiple files, it makes it into 2 gig files. So in this case, if I needed a 40 gig drive, it ended up making these 20 up to 2 gig files, but they'll all be a little tiny, but you'd have 20 of them. If I ended up making a 500 gig drive and make 250 of those files, even if you never used them. It's mainly meant for FAT32 or operating systems that don't support large file sizes. Some file systems only support 2 gig or maybe 4 gig files. We're using extended FAT, or some of you might be using NTFS, but primarily extended FAT. We can have several terabyte files or whatever the file limit is. So we're nowhere near that. So we're leaving all the defaults here and then clicking next again. Clicking I'm OK for the file name. This just is a really good reference as far as what the virtual machine disk file is. It's going to be the same name as your virtual machine. By the way, your virtual machine, I'll take a look at this and then click finish when you're done. Let's go look inside of the folder for the class then. So 2008. The 2 main files that you have to worry about are your VMX file and your VMDK. Your VMDK is the actual hard drive, and your hard drive is separate from your virtual machine, just like your hard drive is kind of separate from your physical machine. You can take that hard drive out and put it in a different computer and move it around. The VMX file is all those configurations that you just looked at and made. It just makes it a text file, and we can even take a look at that if you want. I'll open it with Notepad. Here's Notepad. And it's just text files. You can actually go in here and edit things manually. I wouldn't suggest that at this point, but you could. And so this tells you all the things that you've configured as far as that machine. VMware Workstation launches or opens up this file, and then the software is going to emulate these hardware things that you've specified. Then it's going to look to this hard drive, and whatever operating system you've installed on there, it's going to boot and run just like any other computer. While a virtual machine is open and running in VMware Workstation, you're going to end up with this lock file, an LCK file. I'll just show that to you. So if I end up closing this 2008, that lock file, that lock folder ends up going away. So that's just showing a little bit of the file system. If you also notice that my VMDK file, even though I said it's 40 gigs, it's only 5 megs at this point, because there really isn't anything on it, just the file system. I'm sorry, just the formatting. In fact, the formatting isn't even on there. It's just a blank disk at this point. So I'm going to go back and open up VMware Workstation and open up my virtual machine. So I do File, Open. Go ahead and browse for my folder. I know I'm working with my server 2008. It's in my 2008 folder, and that's what launches is your VMX file. That's what you open in VMware Workstation. So once it's open, we want to install the operating system. So to install the operating system, we want to insert the CD-ROM into the CD-ROM tray. I go ahead and click on that. And I'm not going to use a physical disk. I could. I'm going to use an ISO image instead. And then click Browse. And don't try using these files within your 2008 folder. I've seen people try to point to those things and then the machine doesn't boot. That's because these aren't ISO images. Make sure you're going all the way back to your ISO image folder and choose the proper ISO image. So for this case, we're using 2008 R2, and in fact, it's also Service Pack 1. So it's Release 2 with Service Pack 1 applied to it as well. And that's just like taking the physical CD and putting in a physical CD-ROM. I'm taking a CD image, an ISO file, and putting it into a virtual CD-ROM. I power it on just like any other computer then, and you're going to watch it boot. Okay, while this is booting, there's lots of other stuff on the screen. It talks about wanting to install, VMware tools in the bottom. It tells you when you're finished. You could do that. I just closed that out. You have menus across the top. And then I have my physical machine. It's like I'm booting my Windows, but I still have a start button and taskbar. That's because you're looking at your physical machine. To me, I need to keep things simple. My mind is cluttered enough. So I like working with everything in a full screen mode. So I'm going to do Control-Alt-Enter to bring into full screen mode. In addition, up on top, by default, this menu bar stays up on top, but even that is just distracting and really in the way. I don't need it to do an installation. So I'm going to click the little push pin out in the upper left-hand corner, and the push pin goes away, and now I just have a nice, clean, simple, this is what I'm working on with no extra icons to get in the way. Okay. So now it comes with, it defaults to English and US for our settings. In fact, for this installation, those are the only options that we have. There aren't other options. If I go ahead and click Next, be aware that you have other features on a bootable CD, like repairing your computer. Great utilities are found on there. We're not going to worry about that. We're just installing the operating system though. So to install the operating system, I'm just going to go ahead and click Now, Install Now. And I have lots of options in Windows Server 2008. In the day of 2008, it has 4 versions on this one CD. Actually, technically, it has 8 versions. It has Windows Server 2008 R2 Standard, Enterprise, Data Center, and then just a web server. So that's all that came with is a web server. For each of those 4 main versions, it has 2 subversions. One of them full installation or server core installation. If you notice, the default is for each of the categories is the full installation. That's with your graphical user interface. It's right about this time that Microsoft was pushing or starting to introduce, I should say, the idea of having a server core environment. The graphical user interface is wonderful. I can walk up to it, drag things around or whatever, but it takes up a lot of resources. just to have this whole screen and the icons and your mouse moving all over and this little timer going all the time and arrow effects and whatever, just take up a lot of resources for something that's hardly ever used. And normally you're going to be having this sit in the back corner somewhere in a dark closet with no monitor or keyboard even attached to it, and doing everything remotely, and with that you can use graphical tools. So it's definitely a real push that direction. We're going to do the full GUI though. Eventually at the end we'll take a look at the server core is going to look like in the latest version. But that's where the server core is going to be introduced. It's still looking at the GUI first and server core as a secondary. Starting with 2012, it's just reversed. There's also the standard edition, and back in 2008, standard was pretty minimal. So minimal as in that it just had very, very, very basic functions. Enterprise is what everybody that I knew ran, and so enterprise is what we're going to be installing. Data center was really for the huge, huge data center. This is like for the GMs, General Motors, or the Coca-Colas of the world, or whatever, with huge, 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 huge data centers. Even the companies that were very, very large in our area, you know, a Kohler's or whatever, I don't know, maybe they're running data center, or back in 2008. They've renamed them throughout the years, so it means different things between then and now. But anyways, so we're looking at the Enterprise Full Edition, and like I said, the web server was only a web server. It was Windows Server running their IIS service. So we're going to choose Enterprise Full Installation, and then go ahead and click Next. I'm going to speed read through the license agreement, making sure that you do read through. You would never want to accept a license term that you didn't read, and then go ahead and click Next. The default option is to upgrade to a newer version of Windows. That's hard to do when you don't have one. You're on a blank disk, so you have to do this advanced feature known as installing. Install a new copy of Windows is what you're looking at doing. So don't be worried or scared off just because it's advanced. We only have one hard drive to choose from, so it makes our choice very easy. It's a 40 gig drive, internal drive. Again, it's going to look like a 40 gig drive inside the virtual machine, but really in reality outside it's, you know, only right now it's only 5 meg. Go ahead and click Next, and now it's going to start the file copy. I'm just going to switch the screens a little bit here to look at my VMDK file. As it's installing, you can see that's where it's increasing the VMDK file. This file, this vmem, that's your virtual memory, that's your virtual machine's memory. And remember we said it was 2 gigs of memory, and so that's sitting right there. So as long as it's powered on, you're going to see this file. When you power it off, that file goes away. When you remove or turn off VMware Workstation completely or close 2008 tab, then these lock files will also go away. When it's done copying the files, it's going to reboot. Actually, I think it reboots twice, but eventually you come up to this screen. It says the user's password must be changed before logging in for the first time. 2008's a little vague on this. It's like, which user? When you install Windows Server for any version, it automatically creates a user account called administrator. And that's what it's referring to here, even though it doesn't tell you that. You can't continue without changing it. So you go ahead and click OK. And the new password is going to be our special password. It's up on the board. It's capital PA $W0RD. It meets the complexity requirements. And so now my password's been changed. Since you just changed the password, it knows who you are and logs you right in. That is different in 2012 and in 2016. So this process is just slightly different. I guess this is where I kind of go back to concepts again. Look at the concepts. When you build the server, it's your create an administrator account, you have to change the password. How you do that is going to be slightly different in each case. Also at this point then, so once the server is installed, there's some basic tasks before we actually want to configure the software that we want to do. One thing that I'm really trying to get myself in the habit of doing and want to encourage you to get in the habit of doing is probably the first thing after the Windows installation of any operating system installation is to get rid of the CD. Take the CD-ROM out. If you're doing it on a physical machine, I'm sure you would do that as well. I'm done installing. Let me take that out before I forget it there or whatever. It actually causes a lot of problems in other systems later on. To do that, I can go up to VM and go to Settings. So I go up to the VM menu and go to Settings. And these are the settings that I would have if the machine is turned off. That's what you normally see. But you can also get to the settings while it's running. Some of these things you can actually change while it's running, like change the amount of memory and I don't think you can change the processor. But we're going to be changing the CD. So I'm going to click on the CD again, just like I did before. And I'm going to click it back to using the physical drive. And the main thing is I just don't want this link between this virtual machine and this ISO file. It's possible that I might copy it to a different drive or rename it or whatever, or later I want to delete that file or rename it or copy it and I can't because it's locked, because it's linked to something else. So just get in the habit of removing that. The second thing that you get in the habit of doing, probably the first thing in installing anything, is to install the drivers. And I'm just going to minimize this screen. We're not going to use this right now. And I'll minimize that. Is I want to install the drivers. To install the drivers for this computer, I'm installing VMware tools. And that's just the way of VMware saying, hey, here's your NIC driver, here's your video driver, your audio driver that's specialized for this hardware. It also does some optimization of your processor, knowing it's a virtual machine. So to do that, I go up to VM, and I go to Install VMware Tools. So we love this VM menu. We spend a lot of time in this VM menu. Install VMware Tools. What this is going to do is going to load another virtual CD. So we took one out and we're putting another one in. Fortunately, with Windows 2008, by the way, Windows 2008 is similar to Windows 7. If you put a CD in, it auto launches, but it brings up to a box. It brings up a window, an autoplay window. And in this version, it stays there until you close it or click on something. Later on versions, that's not the case either. So we'll take a look at and see how to deal with that if something comes up. And I want to go ahead and actually run the setup program, which does all my drivers and on optimization for me. So I go ahead and click the setup program. One thing to be careful about, if you have other windows open, like if I had the initial configuration tasks, that window still open. In fact, I could probably still have it open. VMware Tools doesn't really assert itself. While it's running, it puts itself in the background. I'm not sure why, but it does. So this little blinking blue icon is good indication that something's going on that you should take a look at. So if you left this screen open and did VMware Tools, you might be sitting here. It's like, well, what's it doing? It's actually running. It's just behind everything. So go ahead and click on it or minimize the other screens, whatever you want to do to bring it to the foreground. To do the installation, go ahead and click Next. And we will just use a typical install. And then I click the Install button. And you can see it doing different drivers and updates. One of the most obvious drivers that's going to change is the video driver. This is classified as full screen right now, but it's only like 640 or probably 800 by 600. I'm not even sure. And now it's truly full screen with a much higher resolution and a much better video refresh rate. So that makes it very obvious that you're going to be that you have VMware Tools installed. Clicking Finish, it wants to restart. Whenever you install drivers, it's always a good idea to restart. Some drivers aren't fully installed until you have a restart. As we're going to configure later on, we want to make sure we're actually configuring the proper devices and not an old one. Okay, let me tell you another hint here. We say Control-Delete here. We don't want to hit Control-Delete. Control-Delete, what it really does is hit Control-Delete on our physical machine. Anytime that you see a Control-Delete in the Windows world, in the virtual machine, it's been remapped to Control-Alt-Insert. So I'll do Control-Insert later on, but I will do Control-Delete right now. If I do Control-Delete, it brings me to my physical machine's task list, and be able to lock the screen or switch users or sign out or whatever. If I hit Cancel, it does end up sending the Control-Delete to the virtual machine as well, but it just kind of messes up your machine. So just get in the habit of using Control-Alt-Insert in anything virtual, and that'll come in handy for multiple classes to come for you. So the administrator password, we created it just moments ago, so hopefully you have it documented. It's our special password. And go ahead and log in. Another concept time. After you've removed your CD-ROM and you've installed the drivers, now it's time to configure your server. And there's certain things that you should always do to configure your server. It's really nice in Windows Server 2008. It kind of gives you a list of things to do. And the very first thing that they have on this list is to activate Windows. Now, we're running an evaluation copy, so we don't need to activate it. But this is where you would activate it. Having Windows in evaluation mode in a production environment is not a good idea. You're going to want to activate it with a real license key. The next thing in line, it has the set the time zone and then configure the networking. Realize that all of these things can be done within Windows without this screen. Also, this can be done in different ways. This is just one way of doing it. So again, taking the concepts that all these kinds of things have to be done on a new server, but it might be done differently between server 2008, 2012, and 2016. Now let's get to the specifics. Specifically in here, we are going to use this initial configuration tasks window to configure our computer. We're going to skip the activate the windows, but we will set the time zone. It thinks that we're in Pacific time. I wish I lived in California, maybe, or actually this is actually based on Redmond, Washington. Not sure why. Anyway, continue on. Starting right. If I click on the set the time zone, it just brings up your date and time. I could have gone down here in the right hand corner and clicked it as well. But it brings you, it's a nice list to bring you to these different tools. I do want to change the time zone, so I click on change time zone, and we are Central Time. I see a lot of people jumping to UTC -6 Central, and then they click, but that's Central America. That's not us. It can be slightly different, especially when the daylight saving time switches turns on and off. So definitely make sure you choose the right time zone. After you do that, go ahead and double click check the time. It is the correct time at 2:05. And then we'll click OK. Configure the networking. This also is just something you can do from other places, but it's just reminding you need to change the configuration of the networking. Not quite as obvious as the time one. I click on change time zone, it brings me to a little button that says change time zone. Here it says configure your network, and all I get is my NIC. What do you do with that? Well, hopefully you've been introduced to this somewhere along the line, and you can change to a manual IP address. One way of doing that is to right click on your network card and go to Properties, choose TCP/IP version 4 for your addressing, click on Properties, and tell it that you're going to use the following addresses. By the way, all virtual machines start up with numlock disabled. You can go into the BIOS of the virtual machine and make it so it is enabled, but just realize if you start typing, you're going to have the cursor going all over the place. So get in the habit of just typing numlock, and then 192.168.118.10 is going to be just the assigned address for this device, for this server. And that's been pre-configured. You can check the documentation as far as which server should have which IP address. Also, it's in the learning plan. For the subnet mask, it sees that it's a Class C address, so it gives the default Class C network address, which in this case it's fine. And our default gateway is what router gets us off that private network. And there's a virtual router, and the IP address of that router is 192.168.118.2. This will get us to the internet, but it doesn't resolve any names. So if I go to CNN or eBay, it's not going to find it. If I go to 8.8.8.8, it will. DNS is the way of resolving the names to an IP address. We're going to use our local virtual DNS forwarder, which happens to be the same device as our default gateway. This is just like your home. You have a router at home, and it's 192.168.1.1 or whatever that is. That is going to be your default gateway, and it's going to be your DNS forwarder as well. So it's just your private network. Those requests are being sent through that device out to the real live network internet. So go ahead and click OK, and then click Close. I can close this as well. The next thing down here is provide a computer name. So just like we have a static address for a computer, we don't want a server to have a random address. We also want the computer to have a meaningful name. We use the computer name a lot, so it's / server name / share. You're not going to want to be typing in WinCG5A8C5BC6A. And if you looked at that, you'd have no idea what server that even is or what it does. So we want to give it a meaningful name. In this case, we're going to name it 2008. A little can be distracting on the screen. Again, I click on this to change the computer name. I see a blank. Most people start typing. It's a blank. Start typing. That's not the blank. This is a computer description. It does not change the computer name. You have to go down to the change button. So all these are just little different ways of doing things. I click on time zone, it brings me right to time zone. I want to change the IP address, it brings me to the NIC. I want to change the computer name, it brings me to system properties, and I still have to click the change button. This is where I have that really weird computer name. Just for convenience for today, since this is our only server 2008, I'll just name it 2008. Oh, I can't do that, sorry, 2008-1. You can't have only numbers. Don't know why, but you can. So putting a dash fulfills the requirements of not only numbers. Go ahead and click OK. It doesn't want me to restart, and I might as well restart. Sometimes I'll save up all the restarts and do them later. Other times it's just a good idea to restart as you go to make sure you're not missing anything or skipping anything or configuring things wrong. Control-Alt-Insert to log back in. Type in password. It brings me back to the initial configuration tasks. As I was moving down, I did the computer name. I'm moving on to automatic updates. This is something that you would configure on a real server. You're going to make sure that you download and install any current updates, and then you want to make sure that automatic updates are going to keep things set up. And we're not going to do either of those. We don't want to have, the next day and a half occupied by downloading and restarting and downloading and restarting. And you have 16 updates. You are completed. You have 103 updates now. Now you have 2 updates. Now you have 250. It's the whole sequential thing. So anyway, it probably wouldn't be that bad, but you know what I mean. We're not going to do that. Then we get to the bottom, and then we have roles and features, and this is why we have the server. Right now it's a server, but it doesn't do anything. We have to tell it what we want it to do, and that's where the roles come in. So if I click on roles, you don't have to do this. It's gonna say what roles, what do you want the server to do? So it can be an Active Directory server, and we'll talk about that next week, what Active Directory is and all that stuff. It can be a DHCP server, a DNS server. It could be a file server. That's pretty common. It could be a print server. It could be a remote desktop. It could be a web server. All kinds of things that you can make on there. So that's the purpose of it. We're not going to do any of these today, but this is showing what it is. You can also do features. So a feature is not why we installed the server. I installed the server to be a file server or to be a print server. I don't install it to have a BitLocker drive encryption. That's just a feature of the server. So I might want to include that feature to encrypt my drive, so I'd have to install that feature. I might want to include .NET Framework so I can run other applications on top of there. But I don't make a server to be a .NET Framework server. It's just a feature I'm trying to install on there. So it's like adding and removing Windows components, but it's much more of a deeper system type level. And we're not going to do any of those in there. So this is a really cool and great valuable tool. It will come up every single time that you launch this. So every time you start your computer, it's going to start up there. Well, you really don't need it after you're done installing it. So you can check the checkbox that says do not show this window at logon. So I might not want to do that. I don't want to do it at logon. So when you are done, you can also close the window. So I'm going to close it and not have it show anymore. As soon as you close your ICT screen, your initial configuration task screen, it automatically brings you up to Server Manager, and then Server Manager, whereas you end up doing all your administration. So in your administration, you can see where your roles are, you can see what has been installed, if there was anything, and then the tools that kind of go along with it. Any features that you have installed, which right now is 042, you can have diagnostic, any configuration things. So it's very specific tools for the server environment. Now the question is, I want to go back to that ICT screen. And I could restart the server, but I checked that box to say not come up anymore. So it's called initial configuration tasks. So what do you think I could type at the run command to get it back? ICT or OOBE. OOBE. So you type OOBE to get your ICT. What does it stand for? You are right on cue again. It stands for out of box experience. So I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a play on out of body experience or something, but it actually means out of box experience. So I open up my Windows Server installation CD box, and this is what I get, and this is how I can get back to that same experience by typing in OOBE, brings up your ICT screen. So to remind you though, none of these things can't be done. That didn't come out right at all. All of these things can be done in other places. You don't need the screen for anything. It is helpful for the initial configuration. That's why it's called the initial configuration task. But after that, you really don't need it. If you really can't remember how to set the time zone and you really want to get back into there, you can launch OOBE again and then kind of go through the steps and make those changes. Okay, so that's going to be your initial configuration task. As soon as you close that, it's going to launch Server Manager, and even if you already have one open, it's going to launch another one. It just has that trigger built into it. Like I said, this is where you're going to have all your tools that you're going to be using for running your server. As we gotten further along the evolution of servers of 2012 to 2016, you're going to see this interface changing and making it a little bit more usable. You'll also see it more inclusive, that more and more things are being included in this one shell. As you had roles or features, you're going to be able to manage them, administer, write them from here. You can also get to them from the Start menu. So if I go to the Start button, I'm going to end up with this administrative tools list. And these are all things that I can do to administer my server. And these are very specific to Windows Server. You're not going to have most of these. Some of these you will on a regular desktop, but these are specific for a server environment. As I add roles or features, they'll be added to this as well. So once I install Active Directory, then I'm going to have Active Directory tools on here as well. Once I install DNS, Domain Name Services, you're going to have DNS tools in here as well. So you can access it through Server Manager or through the administrative tools. So it's two different places of accessing the tools to administer the services on your server. One more thing I want to show you is that Microsoft is also really trying to get more and more things done through the command prompt, and has since created a brand new command prompt environment, not just command prompt, but it's called PowerShell. PowerShell's a very extensive command prompt, command line interface system. You can run scripts through it. There's all kinds of commands that you can't do in the command prompt that you can do from there, especially with Active Directory. There's ways of creating people and users and whatever. Some of the command, and then you're going to access it by clicking this link down here. This is a little button. You know you're in PowerShell because it'll say PS in front of it. Many of the commands still work. I do a directory. It's just going to look different. If I go to the command prompt, oh, wrong one. Command prompt, just CMD, I guess. I can also do a directory. It's just going to look different. I can change directories to the root. I can still change directories to the root as well. But there's other commands that you can't do. It's going to be just done differently. Time is not recognized in PowerShell, but it is in command prompt. So if you think of a Venn diagram of two big circles and the overlap, the PowerShell is going to be a much larger circle, and command prompt is a smaller circle, but it's going to have its own regions of itself that they are unique. So when we're all done here, we can shut down. We shut down a virtual machine just like a physical machine. We go to start button, and it defaults to log off. Windows servers don't like being shut down. That's not the default to shut down. You don't shut down servers unless you really, really have to. You log off, but it still runs in the background. It just keeps running as a service even if people aren't logged in. So that's part of a service. So you have to click the little caret to be able to shut down. Now you can shut down until you give a reason, and it has to be a good reason. Otherwise, no, it doesn't have to be a good reason. It can be any reason, because I said so. And it is a planned downing. But as soon as you type something in there, then you can down it. But you can't shut down the server without giving a reason. That's been taken out in the latest versions. When you're all done, it's shut down. You're back to your settings screen. I took a lot of time configuring this. I have it just at the base configuration. I want to take a snapshot of this. So I'm going to go up to the VM menu again. Love VM menu. Snapshot. Take a snapshot. And I'll call it the base image. Which is nice about that is no matter what I do to this hardware-wise or software-wise, or I mess things up, or I install roles and it's like, oh, I don't know how to get rid of them, I can always go back to this base image and it's right here from the beginning.